"Don't make me do this," the nun whispered. But the mountain man's next act shocked the town. The morning in the small mountain town was unusually quiet. Mist clung to the pine trees like soft white blankets, and the sun struggled to peek over the peaks, casting long shadows across the narrow streets. The town, though tiny, was alive with simple routines. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, chickens clucked in the yards, and the occasional bark of a dog echoed through the crisp air. Amid all this, Sister Mary moved silently along the stone path that led to the old convent on the hill. Her simple brown robe swayed lightly with each step, and her hands were folded neatly in front of her. She always walked with purpose, even in silence, as if the weight of her responsibility pressed gently but firmly upon her shoulders. Sister Mary was not just any nun. She was known throughout the town for her kindness, her patience, and her quiet strength. She had lived in the convent for most of her life, dedicating herself to the care of orphans, the sick, and anyone in need. The convent itself was an old stone building with ivy climbing up the walls and a small garden where vegetables and flowers grew side by side. The garden was her pride not just for its beauty, but for the lessons it held. Every plant, she often reminded the children, needed care, patience, and understanding to grow, just like people. On this particular morning, Sister Mary noticed something unusual. At the far edge of the town, near the forest line where the mountains began to rise, a figure appeared. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his clothing was rough and patched, as if he had spent many days outdoors without proper shelter. His face was tanned and weathered, and his eyes, though sharp, held a certain depth that spoke of experiences most townsfolk would never understand. The mountain man Jacob, as some called him, had become a figure of curiosity and fear. Stories of his life alone in the wilderness traveled faster than he did, and many in town were wary of his presence. Sister Mary paused for a moment, observing him. There was a quiet intensity in the way he moved, almost like he was in tune with the land itself. He carried a bundle of supplies over one shoulder, and his steps were deliberate, each one seeming to test the stability of the rocky ground beneath him. He did not rush, he did not stumble. He was a man who had learned to survive in places where most would perish. Yet despite the townspeople's warnings, Sister Mary sensed no malice in him. Instead, there was something calm, even respectful, in the way he approached the town. She had first heard about him from the children. They whispered excitedly about the mountain man who roamed the forests alone, gathering herbs, hunting for food, and living without anyone to answer to. Some said he was dangerous. Others claimed he had a kind heart but was misunderstood. Sister Mary knew better than to rely on gossip. She had always taught the children to look beyond appearances and listen with their hearts. Now, watching him approach, she felt a strange mix of caution and curiosity. The mountain man reached the edge of the town and stopped. He scanned the streets as if searching for something or someone. His gaze finally settled on the convent, and he took a deep breath, straightening his back before taking a few more steps forward. Sister Mary, though hesitant, walked toward him, her hands still folded in front of her. She wondered why he had come now. The town had been peaceful, the days predictable. Nothing in recent memory had suggested the need for an outsider, especially one as mysterious as Jacob. As she drew closer, she noticed the way he carried himself. There was a sense of purpose in his movement, a silent declaration that he had a reason for being here, though what it was, she could not yet tell. The mountain man stopped a few feet away from her and placed his bundle carefully on the ground. He looked at her with eyes that were steady and honest, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. Sister Mary felt a shiver run down her spine, not out of fear, but out of the understanding that something significant was about to happen. She remembered the convent rules, the teachings she had followed her entire life. She had always been cautious of outsiders, particularly those who had lived beyond the boundaries of society. Yet in this moment she felt an unusual pull, a subtle sense that this man's intentions were not harmful.
"Good morning," he said, his voice low but firm, carrying a tone that was both respectful and commanding. "I mean no harm to your town, nor to you."
Sister Mary's lips parted slightly, and she took a small step back, unsure of how to respond. She had never spoken to a stranger like this before. "And what brings you here?" she asked softly, her voice barely rising above the wind that whispered through the trees. She remembered the warnings she had whispered to herself over the years, reminders of caution and vigilance. The mountain man nodded, understanding the hesitation. "I have come because there is a situation that requires help," he said. "I know your town is small, and I know the people rely on each other. I do not wish to disrupt your lives, but there are those in need, and I can help." Sister Mary's mind raced. Who could be in need? The town was usually quiet. The river had not flooded recently. The roads were clear, and no one had mentioned illness or danger. And yet, there was an urgency in his voice that could not be ignored. She felt torn between her duty to follow the convent's rules and the undeniable call to help those who might be in danger. Her heart beat faster, and a whisper escaped her lips almost unintentionally. "Don't make me do this." She said it not to him, but to herself, knowing that agreeing to trust this stranger might mean breaking the traditions she had held all her life. It was a moment of vulnerability, a crack in the otherwise steady wall she had built around her decisions and emotions. The mountain man, Jacob, did not respond with anger or frustration. Instead, he nodded slightly, acknowledging her struggle. "I understand," he said quietly. "I ask only for a chance to help, nothing more." She noticed the tools at his side, the careful way he had packed his supplies, the experience etched into every line of his face. He was clearly a man who had lived through harsh winters, survived storms, and faced challenges that most could not imagine. And yet there was a gentleness in his eyes, a willingness to act without demanding recognition or reward. After a long pause, Sister Mary took a deep breath. She knew that agreeing to his presence, even for a short while, might shock the town, and perhaps even her fellow sisters. But something inside her told her that this man, despite his rough exterior, could be trusted. And more importantly, someone, somewhere, might be depending on him, and by extension, on her choice to allow him to act. With a small nod, she finally spoke, her voice steady but still tinged with hesitation. "Very well," she said. "But you must understand the rules here. You cannot enter the convent without permission, and you must respect the people of this town. If you cause harm, you will answer to me." Jacob bowed his head slightly, a sign of respect that was almost forgotten in the modern world. "I will follow your guidance," he said. For a moment, the wind seemed to hold its breath, the town itself waiting for what would come next. The small, simple morning had transformed into a crossroads of fate, where decisions made in quiet whispers could ripple across the lives of many. Sister Mary felt the weight of her choice pressing on her, but beneath it, a quiet hope began to grow. Perhaps this mountain man could bring more than just help. Perhaps he could teach the town, and even herself, something about courage, trust, and the unexpected ways in which people could rise to meet a challenge. As Jacob set his bundle down and began preparing to leave the town for the task ahead, Sister Mary watched him with a mixture of concern and admiration. She knew that whatever happened next, the memory of this morning, the quiet mist, the cold air, the whisper she could not fully silence, would stay with her forever. It was the beginning of a story that would change not just the town, but her understanding of what it truly meant to help, to trust, and to act when faced with difficult choices. And so, the quiet town waited. The smoke from chimneys continued to rise, and Sister Mary, still standing in the shadow of the convent, whispered once more to herself, "Don't make me do this." Little did she know that the decision she had made, small and seemingly simple, would soon set in motion events that would shock the town, challenge her beliefs, and reveal the courage hidden in unexpected places. The morning mist had barely lifted when a sudden change in the weather reminded the town of the mountain's unpredictable nature. Dark clouds rolled across the peaks, heavy and foreboding, and a chill ran through the air. Sister Mary, still standing outside the convent, noticed how quickly the townspeople began to prepare for what was coming. Farmers hurried to secure their animals, merchants closed their stalls, and children were called inside by anxious parents. There was a sense of unease that spread quietly but firmly through the town, the kind that makes every sound feel louder and every shadow darker. Jacob, the mountain man, observed the signs with careful eyes. Years of living in the wild had trained him to notice small details that others overlooked. He saw the sudden darkening of the sky, the way the wind shifted direction, and the smell of wet earth rising from the forest floor. Each signal told him something important. A storm was coming, and it would be strong. He had learned over the years that in the mountains, storms were not just inconvenient. They could be dangerous, even deadly. Sister Mary, though concerned for the town, had never witnessed a storm like this one. She felt a tightening in her chest as she watched the clouds gather, realizing that whatever safety the town had relied upon could soon be tested. It was in moments like these that her role as caretaker and protector became more than just a duty. It became a responsibility that weighed heavily on her heart. The children she cared for, the elderly who depended on her guidance, the farmers and merchants who looked to her for reassurance, all of them were counting on someone to act, and the choice of who that someone would be rested on a difficult decision. By mid-morning, the storm broke. Rain fell in thick sheets, turning the dirt roads into slippery rivers and sending debris tumbling down the mountain paths. The townspeople struggled to keep their animals safe and their homes secure. Sister Mary ran between the convent and nearby houses, helping carry buckets of water to reinforce weak doors and comforting children who clung to her skirts in fear. Every action felt urgent, but she knew that despite all her efforts, some dangers were beyond the walls of the town. It was then that word reached her of the people trapped near the ravine on the far side of the town. The river that ran through the mountains had swollen rapidly, and several townsfolk had been caught off guard while gathering firewood and supplies. Some were children, others adults, and all were stranded by the rising waters. Panic set in quickly among the neighbors who had witnessed the event. They had no way to reach the ravine safely, and every attempt to send someone through the storm seemed foolish and too dangerous. Fear hung over the town like a thick fog. Sister Mary's mind raced. She knew that conventional methods, waiting for the storm to pass or sending unprepared townsfolk into the wild, would likely fail. The people trapped needed someone with experience, someone who knew the mountains as well as they knew their own home. Her thoughts turned to Jacob. He had proven nothing yet, but there was a quiet confidence in the way he moved and the way he had spoken earlier. Could he be trusted with such a task? It was a question that forced her to confront her own fears and the strict rules she had followed all her life. She found him at the edge of town, checking the ropes and equipment he had brought with him. His hands moved with precision, tying knots and securing hooks, as if he had done this countless times before. Seeing him in action, Sister Mary felt a mixture of relief and hesitation. Relief because he clearly had the skill and courage needed. Hesitation because letting an outsider take such responsibility was not something she was accustomed to. Her whisper, "Don't make me do this," surfaced again, this time louder, as if it were a plea to herself rather than a warning to anyone else. Jacob looked up and met her eyes. "The storm will get worse," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. "Those people cannot wait. They will not survive long if we do nothing. I can reach them, but I will need guidance to get through the safest path." Sister Mary took a deep breath, weighing the options. To refuse could mean the loss of life. To agree could mean breaking the convent's rules and placing her trust in someone the town barely knew. Her heart ached as she thought of the children trapped in the ravine, their small hands clinging to rocks, their frightened eyes searching for someone to save them. In that moment, the decision became clear. Faith, she realized, was not just about following rules. It was about acting when action was needed most. "Very well," she said finally, her voice steady but tinged with worry. "I will help you. I will guide you to the safest path, but you must promise me that no unnecessary risk will be taken. The lives of these people are precious, and you cannot treat this as an adventure." Jacob nodded, a small smile appearing despite the tension. "I understand," he replied. "We will save them." With that agreement, they set off together. The townsfolk watched from their windows, umbrellas shielding them from the relentless rain. Some whispered to each other, shocked that Sister Mary had allowed Jacob to take charge. Others felt a surge of hope, sensing that perhaps the town was in capable hands. The path to the ravine was treacherous even without the storm. Mudslides had begun in places, and rocks loosened by the rain made footing uncertain. Trees bent under the force of the wind, their branches threatening to break at any moment. Jacob moved ahead with skill, testing each step before placing his weight. Sister Mary followed as closely as possible, careful not to slip while carrying supplies that might be needed for the rescue. Their journey was silent except for the pounding rain and the occasional warning shout when a rock shifted underfoot. Despite the danger, there was a rhythm to their movement, a silent communication that spoke of trust and teamwork. Each decision had to be calculated, each step deliberate. Hours passed as they navigated the storm. The path narrowed, and at one point, Sister Mary had to hold herself against a rock face while Jacob extended a rope to help a frightened child cross a slippery ledge. Her hands were raw from the cold and wet, and her robes were soaked, but she pressed on, knowing that every moment mattered. She had never imagined herself in such a situation, yet every instinct she had developed as a caretaker guided her. She focused not on fear, but on the people who needed her help, and on the mountain man whose skills were their only chance of survival. Finally, as the rain began to ease slightly, they reached the ravine. The sight that met them was both frightening and heartbreaking. Families huddled together on narrow ledges, the swollen river rushing below them. Children clung to their parents, and some adults tried to keep their footing despite exhaustion. Relief washed over Sister Mary when she saw that everyone was alive, but the danger was far from over. One wrong move, one slip, and disaster could strike at any moment. Jacob quickly assessed the situation. He instructed Sister Mary to help organize the people, keeping them calm while he secured ropes and prepared to bring them to safety one by one. His voice was firm but gentle, providing reassurance and direction. The townspeople who had come to help were given careful tasks, guided by his instructions. Slowly but steadily, the rescue began. Sister Mary marveled at his courage and skill. Every movement was precise, every decision made with care. She realized that this man, despite living outside society, had a wisdom born of experience and a heart capable of great compassion. Her earlier fears began to fade as hope took their place. She whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude, not just for their survival, but for the lesson in trust and courage she was witnessing firsthand. As the first group reached safety, a cheer went up from the townsfolk. The children clung to Sister Mary, their eyes wide with relief and wonder. She hugged them tightly, feeling a deep sense of pride and thankfulness. Jacob continued the rescue, moving with steady determination. Each person brought back safely, a testament to his skill and bravery. By the time the last person was brought from the ravine, the storm had passed, leaving a quiet, damp calm over the town. Mud and debris covered the streets, but every life had been saved. Sister Mary looked at Jacob, her eyes reflecting awe and respect. She knew the town would talk about this day for years to come, about the mountain man who had braved the storm and the nun who had trusted him when no one else could. For Sister Mary, the day was more than a tale of survival. It was a lesson in courage, trust, and the power of taking action when it mattered most. She had faced a choice that weighed heavily on her heart, and she had acted not out of fear or rule-following, but out of compassion and understanding. The town might have been shocked by her decision, but in the end, it had been the right one. The town was quiet once again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. The storm had passed, leaving behind wet streets, broken branches, and the faint smell of damp earth. Smoke still rose from chimneys, and the townspeople cautiously began to emerge from their homes, checking on neighbors and repairing small damages caused by the heavy rain. Sister Mary stood at the edge of the town, looking at the mountains beyond. The sun was starting to shine through the clouds, casting golden light on the wet roofs and glistening streets, but in her heart there was a lingering tension. The danger might have passed for the moment, but she knew that challenges were not always visible, and the choices she had made could have consequences she could not yet see. Jacob, the mountain man, had returned from the ravine, carrying the last of the rescued townsfolk safely back to dry ground. His clothes were soaked, his boots caked in mud, but there was a calm satisfaction in his expression. He moved with quiet strength, speaking softly to the children and helping the adults find shelter. Sister Mary watched him closely, noticing how effortlessly he balanced caution with action. He had risked his life without hesitation, and yet he remained humble, offering no words of pride or boastfulness. It was as if the act itself was all that mattered, not recognition or reward. The townspeople began to gather around, murmuring among themselves. Many looked at Jacob with awe, some with suspicion, and others with gratitude that was difficult to express in words. It was not every day that someone braved a storm in the dangerous mountains to save lives. Conversations spread quickly, recounting the daring feats and the calm leadership of both the mountain man and the nun who had allowed him to act. Sister Mary felt a mix of relief and anxiety. She had trusted Jacob, but she knew that public opinion could shift quickly. People might see her choice as bold and wise, or as reckless. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Sister Mary turned to Jacob.
"You did more than I expected," she said softly, her voice a mixture of admiration and concern. I wasn't sure anyone could reach them in time."
She paused, realizing how unusual it was for her to speak so openly about her own doubts.
"You have a rare skill and a rare heart. The town will remember this." Jacob shook his head slightly, wiping mud from his boots. "It was necessary," he said simply. "I did what needed to be done. I don't seek thanks or recognition. The important thing is that everyone is safe." His calm certainty struck Sister Mary. It was not arrogance, nor was it bravado. It was pure understanding of responsibility and action. Later that day, as the townsfolk returned to their daily routines, a sense of normalcy began to re-establish itself. Children returned to the orphanage, curious about the day's events, but also exhausted from the fear they had endured. Farmers and merchants worked to repair what had been damaged, sharing stories of the mountain man's bravery and Sister Mary's guidance. Everywhere she went, Sister Mary felt eyes on her, some filled with respect, others with quiet judgment. She had stepped outside her normal role, allowed an outsider into the heart of the town's crisis, and now she wondered how many would truly understand the weight of that choice. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the town, Sister Mary and Jacob walked together along the stone path to the convent. The air was fresh after the storm, carrying the faint scent of pine and wet soil. Birds cautiously returned to their nests, singing softly as if nothing had happened, while the townspeople worked to repair fences and clean up the streets. Sister Mary's mind wandered as she walked beside Jacob, thinking about the day's events and what they had meant for her understanding of courage and trust. "You risked your life," she said quietly. "Many would have turned back or waited for help that might never have come." She paused, unsure if she was allowed to say more. "Why did you do it?" Jacob looked ahead, his eyes scanning the horizon where the mountains met the sky. "Because it was right," he said simply. "Because I can. Because someone has to step forward when others cannot. The mountains have taught me that life is precious, that hesitation can cost more than courage ever will. I do not see bravery as a choice. It is simply what is required in moments like this." Sister Mary considered his words carefully. She had spent her life guided by faith and rules, yet in that moment she realized that courage was also a form of faith. Faith in action, in doing what was right even when uncertain or afraid. Her whisper from the morning, "Don't make me do this," seemed distant now, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement that she had done exactly what needed to be done. And in trusting Jacob, she had not only saved lives, but had learned a deeper truth about human strength. As they reached the convent, the familiar stone walls seemed both comforting and confining. Inside, the children and other sisters were safe, and the town had been spared the worst of the storm's consequences. Sister Mary looked at Jacob, considering how the day had shifted the town's perception of him. Once a mysterious figure to be feared, he was now a hero in the eyes of many, though some still whispered doubts. She realized that perception could change quickly, but the truth of one's actions remained constant. Jacob placed his bundle down near the entrance of the convent and took a deep breath, shaking the remaining rain from his coat. "You did well," he said quietly, looking at Sister Mary. "You trusted when it was not easy to do so." "That is courage, too." Sister Mary smiled faintly. "Perhaps," she said. "I only hope the town will understand that sometimes helping requires choices that are not simple, and trust that is not easy." The night settled over the town slowly, the wind whispering through the trees and the stars beginning to shine above the mountains. Inside the convent, the warmth of the hearth offered comfort, but Sister Mary could not stop thinking about the mountains, the ravine, and the storm. She realized that life often demanded action beyond what was familiar, and that courage was not measured only by strength, but by willingness to act despite fear. Jacob prepared to leave the next morning, but before he did, he helped secure the town for future storms. He showed the townsfolk how to reinforce bridges, clear paths of loose rocks, and protect themselves from rising water. Sister Mary watched him patiently, seeing not just a mountain man, but a teacher in his own way. passing along knowledge that could save lives long after he was gone. By the time he left, the town had shifted subtly. The fear and suspicion that had greeted him earlier had been replaced by respect and a sense of gratitude. People who had doubted him now spoke his name with admiration, and even those who remained cautious understood that sometimes the most unlikely heroes appear in times of crisis. Sister Mary felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that she had been part of that change. Her choice to trust had allowed courage to shine, and she had learned that leadership sometimes required stepping beyond the familiar, even when it was uncomfortable. That night, as she walked through the quiet halls of the convent, Sister Mary reflected on everything that had happened: the storm, the trapped townsfolk, Jacob's bravery, and her own decision to trust an outsider. All of it had left an imprint on her heart. She realized that courage and compassion often intersect in unexpected ways, and that sometimes the right choice was the hardest to make. She whispered once more, this time with calm and understanding, "Thank you for helping me see what is possible." Outside, the mountains stood tall and silent, their peaks catching the last light of the day. The town had survived the storm, and life would continue, but the memory of the mountain man's bravery and Sister Mary's trust would remain. The day had tested them both, showing that true courage comes not only from facing danger but also from making difficult choices, trusting others, and acting when it matters most. And though the town slept peacefully that night, no one could forget the lessons of that storm. The lessons of courage, trust, and the unexpected ways in which people could rise to meet a challenge. Sister Mary closed her eyes, knowing that the future might bring more storms, more challenges, and more moments where action would be required. But she also knew that when courage and compassion guided her decisions, even the most impossible situations could be overcome. The days following the storm were tense but filled with a quiet energy. The town was recovering, but the memory of the event lingered like the mist in the morning air. Families cleaned their homes, repaired broken fences, and cleared debris from the streets. Children returned to the orphanage, some still wide-eyed from fear, while others whispered among themselves about the mountain man who had braved the storm and saved so many lives. Sister Mary moved through the town tirelessly, offering help wherever it was needed. But she also felt the weight of reflection pressing on her heart. She knew that the rescue had changed everything, not just for the townspeople, but for herself as well. Though Jacob had left shortly after helping the town prepare for future storms, his presence was still felt. People spoke of him with a mixture of awe and curiosity, recounting the precise way he had carried children across the slippery paths, the way he had reassured frightened parents, and the calm authority he had shown in the face of danger. Many had begun to question the old stories they had heard about him, realizing that perhaps the mountain man was not to be feared, but respected. Some families who had doubted Sister Mary's decision whispered apologies to her, acknowledging that her choice to trust him had saved lives. Sister Mary herself walked slowly along the outskirts of the town one afternoon, thinking about the events that had unfolded. Her thoughts returned repeatedly to the ravine, and the moment when she had whispered, "Don't make me do this." She realized that those words had captured more than fear. They had captured responsibility. The decision to allow Jacob to act, to step outside her comfort zone, had been hers alone. No one else could have made it for her, and she understood now that true courage often required difficult, lonely decisions. Yet while the storm had passed, challenges remained. The ravine where the townsfolk had been trapped was still unstable. Landslides were possible, and the river, though calmer, remained dangerous. Sister Mary knew that the town could not rely solely on luck for future safety. She had seen the bravery and skill of Jacob firsthand, and she wished to impart some of that preparedness to the people who lived there. it became clear to her that the lesson of the storm was not only about survival, but also about understanding, planning, and acting wisely in the face of danger. One morning, a message arrived from a neighboring town. A section of road had been damaged by the storm, cutting off access to food and supplies. The townspeople were anxious, unsure if they could navigate the treacherous path to deliver help. Sister Mary felt a familiar tug in her heart. She thought of Jacob, knowing that he could likely handle the challenge, but she also realized that calling him again might shock the town. The memory of the earlier rescue reminded her that courage often required action, even when it was uncomfortable. After careful thought, she decided to send a message to Jacob, asking for his assistance. Within hours, he returned, moving through the mountain paths as though they were familiar hallways in his own home. The townsfolk watched with a mixture of hope and trepidation. They had come to respect Jacob's skills, but the idea of an outsider taking charge again stirred old doubts in some hearts. Sister Mary, however, stood beside him calmly, offering guidance and reassurance to both him and the people of the town. She understood that leadership required not just action, but the ability to inspire trust in others. The journey to the damaged road was not easy. Jacob navigated narrow ledges, steep inclines, and fallen trees, all while the townsfolk followed as best they could. Sister Mary instructed them on safety measures, ensuring that no one was left behind or placed in unnecessary danger. Each step required careful thought, and the tension was palpable. The group worked as a team, combining the mountain man's skill with Sister Mary's knowledge of the town and its people. Together they moved forward, overcoming obstacles that had seemed insurmountable from a distance. When they reached the damaged road, the sight was worse than anyone had imagined. Large sections of earth had slid away, leaving gaps that were almost impossible to cross. The river below rushed with renewed force from melting snow in the mountains, and debris from trees and rocks blocked the path. Panic threatened to rise, but Jacob remained calm, assessing the situation with a level-headed approach. He quickly organized the group, explaining how each person could help without placing themselves at risk. Sister Mary coordinated with him, ensuring that families and children were kept safe while supplies were moved carefully across the hazardous area. Hours passed, and the work was grueling. The rain, though light compared to the previous storm, continued to fall, adding slippery conditions to an already dangerous environment. Yet, step by step, obstacle by obstacle, the team made progress. The townsfolk began to see Jacob not just as an outsider, but as a leader who could bring order and safety in moments of crisis. Sister Mary, though exhausted, felt a deep sense of pride. She realized that trust had been earned through action, and that courage was contagious. The mountain man's calm confidence inspired even the most hesitant townsfolk to overcome fear and act with care. Finally, as the sun began to set behind the mountains, the last supplies were moved across the damaged road. Families hugged each other in relief, exhausted but safe. The children laughed and shouted, the sound of their joy carrying through the valley like music. Sister Mary looked at Jacob, her eyes reflecting gratitude and respect. He had risked much again, and yet he remained humble, offering no praise for his own deeds. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You have done more than anyone could have expected." Jacob shook his head, smiling faintly. "I only did what was needed," he replied. "The important thing is that the town is safe, and the people can continue their lives without fear. That is all that matters." Sister Mary nodded, understanding fully. She had learned that heroism was not always about recognition, but about action, skill, and the willingness to step forward when others could not. The town had been challenged by nature and circumstance, but the experience had also shown them the value of courage, teamwork, and trust. As they returned to the town, the streets were quiet but no longer tense. The townsfolk had begun to rebuild and recover, inspired by the day's events. They spoke in hushed tones about the bravery and skill they had witnessed, realizing that their community had grown stronger through adversity. Sister Mary felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She had faced difficult choices, risked criticism, and relied on the judgment of an outsider, yet the results had been life-changing for the town. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the mountains glowed with a warm golden light, Sister Mary walked slowly through the convent garden. The air smelled of wet earth and blooming flowers, and the children played quietly nearby. She reflected on the lessons of the storm, the ravine, and the dangerous journey to the damaged road. She realized that life was unpredictable, but courage, trust, and careful action could transform fear into safety and despair into hope. Jacob had taught the town more than just survival skills. He had taught them how to face fear with calm determination, how to trust when circumstances were uncertain, and how to act with care and wisdom in the face of danger. Sister Mary felt her own understanding of courage grow that day. She had seen firsthand how action guided by compassion and experience could inspire others and save lives. And though the storm was over, its lessons remained. The town would remember the mountain man's bravery, Sister Mary's trust, and the day when ordinary people had acted with extraordinary courage. The experience had changed the town, and it had changed her. She understood now that being a caretaker was not only about protecting people from harm, but also about guiding them to see the strength and courage within themselves. As night fell, the mountain stood tall and silent, watching over the town. The storm had passed, but its mark remained, not just in the streets and homes, but in the hearts of the people. Sister Mary closed her eyes, grateful for the day's events and the lessons they had brought. She knew that challenges would come again, as they always did, but she also knew that courage and trust, once awakened, could carry a community through even the darkest moments. The morning after the storm felt calm, almost unreal. The town was bathed in sunlight, sparkling on wet rooftops and puddles in the streets. Birds chirped cheerfully as if nothing had happened, and the air smelled of pine, earth, and new beginnings. Life was returning to normal, yet the events of the past days lingered in the hearts of the townspeople. Families spoke quietly among themselves, sharing their gratitude and reflecting on how fragile life could be. Even the youngest children seemed to understand in their own small ways that something extraordinary had taken place. Sister Mary moved slowly through the streets, checking on each family, offering guidance, comfort, and reassurance. Her mind replayed the moments of the storm, the ravine, and the damaged road. Each memory brought both pride and humility. She had witnessed courage in its purest form, in the mountain man's calm actions, and in the townspeople stepping forward under her guidance. Yet she also recognized that courage came with responsibility, the responsibility to choose wisely, act decisively, and trust those who were capable. Jacob returned to town that morning, quietly moving through the streets as though he belonged. Some townsfolk paused to watch him, some whispered his name with awe, and a few still glanced cautiously, unsure if their trust could extend beyond the events they had witnessed. Sister Mary approached him, her heart full of gratitude. "You have done more than any of us could have imagined," she said. "The town owes you a debt that words cannot describe." A modest smile on his face. "I only did what needed to be done," he replied simply. "The town was in danger, and action was required. I was able to help because you allowed it. Your trust made this possible." Sister Mary considered his words. It was true that without her choice to trust him, the rescues might not have been successful. She had stepped outside the strict boundaries of the convent and relied on someone who lived outside the rules she had always followed. And yet, That very choice had saved lives and taught both herself and the town a lesson about courage, compassion, and judgment. The day was filled with recovery work. Townsfolk repaired homes, cleared debris, and helped each other rebuild what the storm had damaged. Jacob assisted quietly, offering practical advice, helping carry heavy loads, and showing how to reinforce structures against future storms. Children followed him with curiosity, watching his skillful movements and careful guidance. Sister Mary smiled at the sight, realizing that he had become more than a hero in the town's eyes. He had become a teacher, a source of wisdom in times of challenge. By midday, a town meeting was called in the main square. The mayor, a kindly man who had once been skeptical of Jacob, spoke to the gathered crowd. "We have all seen courage this week," he began. "We have seen bravery in unexpected places, and we have learned that sometimes help comes from those we least expect. The mountain man has shown us what it means to act with skill, calm, and determination. Sister Mary has reminded us that trust and leadership are just as important as courage." The crowd nodded, murmurs of agreement spreading as families and neighbors looked at one another with renewed respect and understanding. Sister Mary felt a gentle pressure on her arm. She looked down to see a small child, one of the children rescued from the ravine, looking up at her with wide, innocent eyes.
"Thank you for helping us," the child said simply. Sister Mary knelt, holding the child's hand, feeling a warmth in her chest she could not fully explain.
"No," she replied softly. "We helped each other. That is what matters. Courage is not just one person. It is everyone acting together when it is needed most." Jacob remained quiet at the edge of the gathering, observing the town with thoughtful eyes. He had come to the town as an outsider, yet now he felt a subtle connection, as if he were part of something larger than himself. The town had given him nothing but opportunity to act, and in return, he had shared his knowledge, his courage, and his heart. It was a simple exchange, yet one that changed everything. As the afternoon sunlight faded and the sky turned soft shades of pink and gold, Sister Mary led a small group back to the convent. Inside, the children played quietly, some exhausted from the events of the past days, others curious and full of questions. Sister Mary answered each question with patience, knowing that their understanding of courage and trust would be shaped by what they had witnessed. She realized that these lessons would stay with them forever, forming the foundation of the town's future resilience. That evening, as the town settled for the night, Sister Mary walked to the edge of the convent garden. The mountains rose majestically before her, their peaks glowing faintly in the last light of the sun. The storm was over, yet she could sense that life, much like the mountains, would continue to bring challenges. But she no longer felt fear at the unknown. Instead, she felt readiness, strengthened by the knowledge that courage, trust, and compassion could guide her through any trial. Jacob appeared quietly beside her. "The town is safer now," he said, "but it will always face dangers. What matters is that the people know they can act when needed. That is the lesson they will carry forward." Sister Mary nodded, feeling a deep sense of peace. "Yes," she replied, "and we will remember that help comes in many forms, sometimes from unexpected places. The important thing is to recognize it when it appears." For a long while they stood in silence, watching the stars appear one by one in the clear night sky. The town slept peacefully below, safe for the moment, yet changed forever by the courage and trust that had emerged from the storm. Sister Mary reflected on the journey, the fear, the choices, the action, and the lessons. She realized that leadership was not just about guiding others, but about recognizing the potential in people and allowing it to flourish. And courage, she understood now, was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. The next morning, life returned to its routines. But the town was different. People were kinder, more patient, and more willing to help each other. They shared their experiences, passing down stories of bravery and trust. The children, in particular, carried the memory of the mountain man and the nun who had trusted him, understanding that courage and kindness could coexist in ways that transformed entire communities. Sister Mary continued her work at the convent, but her perspective had grown broader. She understood now that guidance did not always come from within walls or from familiar faces. Sometimes it came from outside, from someone who had lived a different life, seen different dangers, and learned to act with courage and skill. And sometimes the most important thing a leader could do was to trust that person, allowing bravery and wisdom to shine through. Jacob, after ensuring the town's paths and structures were safe, quietly moved on, returning to the mountains he called home. But the town would never forget him, nor the lessons he had taught. The mountains, once feared and respected from a distance, now seemed a little less intimidating, a little more understood, because of the courage and knowledge shared in the days of the storm. As the years passed, the story of the storm, the ravine, and the mountain man became a part of the town's history, told and retold in quiet moments by the fireside or in classrooms. Sister Mary, though older and wiser, often reflected on that time, remembering the whisper she had said in the first moments of decision, "Don't make me do this." She realized that sometimes the hardest choices were also the most important, and that trusting the right person could save lives and change hearts. And so the town grew stronger, wiser, and more connected. The lessons of courage, trust, and compassion endured, shaping generations to come. Sister Mary continued to guide the town, now with deeper understanding and faith in the goodness of people. The mountains stood tall and silent, watching over the town as they always had, and the memory of the mountain man's quiet bravery remained a shining example of what could be achieved when courage met trust and compassion. In the end, the storm had passed, but its effects were lasting, not in destruction, but in the strength, unity, and courage it had awakened in the hearts of the town. Sister Mary smiled quietly to herself, knowing that sometimes the most shocking acts of bravery could inspire the greatest change, and that even a single choice, made with trust and courage, could ripple through an entire community for years to come.